Hi. So first of all, thank you very much for being here today. Um, I actually just sat and watched the last talk around Glasgow as a tech ecosystem. So hopefully the things I'll talk about today will be relevant to that. I'm here to talk about TechScaler that you might have heard of. Um, but before I talk about TechScaler, I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about tech ecosystems in general, where they come from, what they mean, and, and what we can do to build them. So I'll be talking mercifully shortly about Codebase and very quickly about myself. And then I'll be talking about tech ecosystems, what they are, who defines them, what the components are, and then I'll look to sort of bring a metaphor to bring all those components together. And that metaphor is a graphic equalizer. It's an old school 80s, 90s metaphor. I hope it's still kind of relevant, but I'll talk about that. And then I'll look at some different examples globally of tech ecosystems. Then talk a little bit about the Scottish tech ecosystem, what that looks like if you were to show it in a graphic equalizer. And then talk about TechScaler, give some factual stuff on what TechScaler is, what it does. I've given this talk a couple of times before. I can do it at different speeds, frankly. If there are any questions people have, please feel free to ask questions at the end if you're so inclined. I can hardly see, but a quick show of hands. Are people interested in doing a Q&A session at all? Who would be in favor of it? A couple of people? OK, cool. So I'll try and do it a little bit faster, then we can add some Q&A at the end. OK, cool. So quick introduction to Codebase. We've been around since 2014. Essentially, Codebase started off in Edinburgh. It was very much about capturing the kind of momentum that was happening in the city based on what Skyscanner were doing, what Fangio was doing. Fangio was one of the first companies in the building. Codebase grew very, very, very quickly to become the sort of largest tech incubator in the UK. We've got 3 locations. You can read all that there in Aberdeen, Stirling, and Edinburgh. We're looking to open something in Glasgow very, very soon, hopefully in October or so. We've got about 120 or so, 130, because the number's so big, it fluctuates quite a bit, startups in our buildings. Over that time, there's been a bunch of new jobs created, an awful lot of money's been raised. All this to say that we just know loads and loads of startups, have done lots and lots of stuff in that space. Codebase has also had a partnership with Barclays for the last, I guess, 7 years almost. And we provide support and mentorship to all of the Eagle Labs. You might have heard of Eagle Labs throughout the UK. And again, all this just means that we just get to see hundreds and hundreds, maybe even 1,000 or so, scratching probably at 1,000 mark, amount of startups. Yeah, that's a quick intro to Codebase. Myself, as was said in the introduction, Codebase is kind of my 3rd startup in Americana sort of playbook nomenclature. I'm known as a late founder, but if you say that in the UK, it sounds like you're dead. So hopefully that's not the case. But I've been at Codebase for about 6, almost 7 years, and I've got skin in the game. I'm one of the 3 founders of the company. The stuff I look after is strategy, partnerships. I think loads about ecosystems, startups, corporate transformation, those kind of bits. So really happy to talk about all these things today if you have some questions around it. Cool. So let's look at tech ecosystems. Now, it's a word that's used a lot. People throw it around. And to be honest, in the game we're in, it's a language game to a huge degree. People use words and mean different things by those words very often. So I thought to aid communication and get a clear message across, hopefully, I would sort of give a deep reading of the word ecosystem, what it means. So etymologically, the first thing that's really interesting about the word is that it came about in the 1930s, so not quite 100 years ago. So it's a very recent word if you think about it. And it was created and defined by, essentially via a sort of pen pal letter friendship between 2 botanists who were English, actually. And what they were doing was they were trying to look at species of plants and animals, and they discovered if they shared each other's work with each other, that actually understanding things is easier and better and more deeper if you understand things within their context. So you're not just looking at a particular tree or a bush or a frog, and those are the things they would write to each other about. If you take them isolated from their habitat, you don't really understand them that well. And so they came up with this concept of ecosystem to understand things better, not just per se, but in their kind of organic kind of context. And that's a really interesting thought if you think about it. Just keep that in your heads for now. If we fast forward roughly 60 years or so, we find that metaphor used for the first time in the business world. And there's a kind of seminal, really amazing piece from 1993, I think, Harvard Business Review by James Moore, that's still widely available. I'd urge you to read it if you're into that kind of stuff. It's amazing how prescient it is and how relevant it still is, but how it's still kind of different of the world we inhabit now. And the driver behind looking at ecosystems in that context was looking at ecosystems to understand and map kind of movements and sort of activity of businesses and trying to find some kind of analogy to the world of nature. It spawned a whole bunch of language such as, companies have got a lifetime or longevity of a company, demise, birth, expansion. All those kind of words started to come up and describe businesses after that kind of linguistic mapping exercise was done metaphorically using tech ecosystems as your main driver. That's the 90s. Fast forward to now, and the word ecosystem is used all the time. All the time. I use it. I'm, the most guilty person probably. I use it all the time. And there are various definitions. Right now, most of them will, use the words of complex or network effects or things like that. So interconnected, all those kind of words. That's what we're looking at now. The big change on ecosystems now is also things that, I don't know how to express it better, companies that even capitalism would kind of agree should exist. And those kind of companies would be net zero companies or social impact companies. So all those parts are kind of loaded onto the topic of ecosystem. To kind of just repeat that, to drive it home, we start using ecosystem to understand things in context, not in isolation. Then we map it to the business world. And having mapped it to the business world, ecosystem then allows us to start have more complex thoughts on equity, accessibility, diversity, all those kind of words that we're using now to try and build a new, fair, equitable system that's somehow still capitalist and still looks at growth. So that's just a quick kind of overview of where the word comes from and how we're using it. Next I want to talk about basically just highlight the fact that naming things is A, really hard, and B, naming things is more often than not a kind of indicator of the person naming rather than the thing that's being named. And I want to give you some evidence of that and just show you some examples of what that can look like. This is maybe, I don't know, quick show of hands. Do people know this definition? If you can see, well, a couple, okay. So this is a famous definition by Paul Graham, who was one of the founders of Y Combinator. And it's the most of libertarian, super minimal, thin definition of an ecosystem. And the thing I want to draw your attention to is Paul Graham kind of focuses on two aspects, rich people and nerds. And it struck me after years reading this, looking at it, that if you look at my little definition at the bottom, Paul Graham himself is actually a rich nerd. If we then go to Joe Darkos, one of many, there's so many definitions of ecosystems. Joe, at the point when he created this, was the developer outreach guy at Microsoft. And his definition of an ecosystem will have developers and large corporations central to what an ecosystem is. So again, a kind of reflection of the person making that up. Here's another one, a different Joe this time, Joe Callahan, the VC in Boston. Again, there are loads and loads of those definitions. It's just interesting to see, okay, central to an ecosystem is a venture capital firm, says a VC. So I'm just giving you those examples to say that we all kind of fall into this sort of anthropological trap almost of describing things when we're actually really just describing us and kind of saying our own importance. So I just wanted everyone to bear that in mind when we think about ecosystems, because I'm about to do the same thing. So my definition of ecosystems would have the following components: startups, the state involving, academia, agencies, large corporations, and investors. And in the chat earlier, for example, we had a startup, we had a large corporation, or two large corporations, essentially. And I just wanted to say that if you look at those different building blocks, just consider how differently those people see the world. So if you're in a large corporation, you'll see the world in terms of years or maybe decades. Your risk appetite will go towards, very low. You're basically there to maintain the thing that's there. You want to grow and add stuff to it, but you're not a growth stock anymore. You're a dividend stock. You're something that's there that's not to fail. So you'll see the world in terms of annual bonuses and things like that. You'll be employee number 4,200,333, something like that. Compared to a startup, well, you'll be employee maybe 1 or 2 if you're a founder, or you'll be employee number 10 or something if you're an outright first employee. So the level of agency you'll have will be much, much higher in a startup than it will be in a large institution. The same goes for states or academia. Agencies as well is another example. By agencies, I mean service providers, so digital agencies, etc. You'll see the world in terms of months, and you'll be much more opportunistic and much more kind of going with the flow and trying to hunt and kill what you can eat and all that kind of stuff. You might be using the same terminology like ecosystem and corporate navigation and all that kind of stuff, but you actually mean completely different things when you're talking to each other. And I just wanted to sort of bring that out, that that's one of the key challenges we all have, myself included, when I'm trying to talk about this. So I was thinking of a way to try and communicate this better, and I thought, I'm 48, so I'm an old guy these days, and the metaphors I have at my disposal are from a lot of decades ago. And one of them I thought was a graphic equalizer on a stereo system. So the graphic equalizer, for avoidance of doubt for younger people, was this bit here. And you would adjust bass and treble, etc., and you would get different sounds and different settings on the music you'd be listening to. And it struck me that might be a decent way to describe an ecosystem. And if you look at the different levers, and yes, I took 3 hours to make this, so I have no graphic design skills whatsoever, but please go with me. If this is a graphic equalizer, and instead of having bass and treble, etc., we've got startup, state, academia, etc., all the buckets I mentioned beforehand. If we put everything at 0, this is kind of what it would look like. And I thought maybe we can start to describe countries or local ecosystems via this metaphor. So what would it look like if we had a place where startups are pushed right down, there's almost no innovation by startups, the state's right up, academia is kind of neutral, there's no agencies, there's no corporations, there's no investors. As an extreme example, this isn't strictly mega accurate, it's more sort of crowdsourced. If I may ask any audience participation, what country do you think this would be? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Brilliant. Exactly. So hopefully you get it. That's where I'm trying to come with that. Where do you think this country would be? Not that many startups, massive state, not that much academia, loads and loads of agencies, large corporations, and tons of money. Dubai, UAE. And then, what about this? Bit of startup stuff, massive state involvement, massive academic involvement, loads and loads of agencies, not that much big corp stuff, almost no investment. Anyone? God, it's so hard, I can hardly see anything here. All right, I will, there you go. My opinion, you may beg to differ. So that's what I was trying to look at with this graphic equalizer thing. Like, what kind of ecosystem do we live in? Is it one that prioritizes the state? Is it a moneyed ecosystem that doesn't have any talent? Is it a place with tons of talent but no experience? Is it a place that's driven by the more ephemeral, short-term success of agencies? Does it create lots of startups? What does that look like? And if you bear that in mind, this is how I'd like to sort of contextualize what TechScaler is. Who here has heard of TechScaler, if I may ask? Hands up. OK, quite a few people. Cool. So The vision for TechScaler then, as we put it forward in the bid for this, uh, encapsulates three main bits. The first is education, the second is place, and the third is community, or a market square. We're moving away from market square a little bit internally because everyone says marketplace, and marketplace is almost the most libertarian word you can think of, and community is quite literally the most communitarian word you can think of, so it's hard to name this. As I said earlier, naming stuff's hard. But those are the kind of three building blocks we're looking at. I'll go through them now one by one. So education is about educating startups into existence. We want to create as many startups as we can, and we'll do that via education. It's chopped into online startup basics, so you'll have a first place to go if you want to build something, you want to see what it looks like, have some ideas. Then there'll be a more involved Startup 101 course, where you'll get sort of basics, come into sort of language games, understand playbooks, become playbook literate. Startup 102, you'll go further along. Mentorship will follow you alongside throughout. And then we partner with a company called Reforge. I'll talk about them more in a second. And then finally, we have bridge programs. Bridge programs are programs we've been running for 5 years or so already, where we expose startups to corporates. You might have heard the gentleman from Morgan Stanley earlier. There's an old kind of cliche that says, startups don't know how to sell, but corporates don't know how to buy. So that's where we're trying to help with that piece. Okay, so I mentioned Reforge. Reforge are our partners in California, and for the avoidance of doubt, we are partnering with them, but the next cohort that's going to start is going to be in January, February. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to take a bunch of the best Scottish scaling companies and expose them to a cohort of other scaling companies globally that's run by people who are sort of ex-Pinterest, Yelp, Slack. You can see all the logos there. Reforge is heavily populated with people who are ex-HubSpot, ex-Twitch, and ex-Uber. In the black box, you can see some of the kind of topics, because we're very, very clear on the fact that we think we can do a decent job with this sort of generic early stage stuff and help people with that. But when it comes to actually scaling and growing, think of, these old maps in the Middle Ages where you'd have a bunch of hand-drawn sort of continents and stuff, and then some waves for water, and then you'd have dragons at the edge because no one had gone there yet. So when it comes to scaling, we're kind of like, there be dragons for us. We just haven't done that ourselves. The company I had that worked out, we grew from 1 to 160 people. I don't know, my kung fu stops at that point. I don't know what to do. When 170, I'm already lost. So that's how we're working with Reforge. The second part is place. So currently we have 3 locations in Codebase. We're in Stirling, Edinburgh, and Aberdeen, as I said. We'll be opening in Glasgow hopefully very, very soon. So TechScaler is launching on the 1st of November, so we're still in mobilization phase at the moment, working like crazy. But we will have Glasgow upon launch. We're hopeful that we'll have Dundee ready as well. We're going to Inverness, and then a year later, we'll be in the Borders, Dumfries, Galloway. But we're looking to have 7 offline locations, but of course a huge online presence as well. The third bucket is community, as I said, Market Square. The idea that you can meet other people who are going through the same stuff you're going through. And you're going through stuff where you might, talk to people who are 300 steps ahead of you, maybe 30 steps ahead of you, maybe 3 steps ahead of you. Not so much 3,000. Maybe talking to billionaires can be, can be really interesting, can stoke your ambition fires maybe. But there's not massive amounts of value normally, so we're trying to keep people closer, people who've got more in common, to exchange ideas and talk to each other. We do this via meetups, in person and virtual, Slack channels, you can read all the other stuff, events, a bunch of stuff there, and we're looking to just drive that community together, to expose each to the other, and drive more uptake. So this is how we want to get the, the graphic equalizer for Scotland, and of course that includes Glasgow. We're just trying to push the slider for startups up. Hope you can recall what it was like before. We're kind of trying to double it. We're just trying to create as many startups as we can. We understand, we should all understand, that building startups is a business of failure, frankly. Even at Y Combinator, you've got a 90% failure rate. So we're just trying to show people there's a path you can go on. It's de-risked for you personally. You can learn a bunch of stuff. It's a viable thing for you to do. There'll be help for you at every stage. The help is not Dusty, it's not the state, or it's not academics or consultants. It's people who are trying to build this stuff themselves. and they'll help you. We also want to be incredibly outward-looking, so we'll be looking to other ecosystems for help. Many times today it's been said that we need help from the outside to come in and give us that extra bit of experience. The big challenge is how do you incentivize those people to join? It's a very, very hard thing to do. We're trying to work on that, trying to see if we can build a new way to do that. Finally, I've got two more slides. I'll be really fast. This tweet is true, and it really freaks me out. It really worries me. So in Europe, it's not just Scotland or not just Glasgow or not the UK. In Europe, we just don't create new, big, massive companies anymore. I'm actually German, and if you look outside and see, I don't know, windows or cars or all that kind of stuff, you'll see loads of German logos, and everyone will know Volkswagen and Nivea and Mercedes or whatever, I don't know. But if you look on your phones, you won't see any German kind of logos for apps, nor for British ones, really. And we just aren't building cool stuff in a digital space. We're not building growth stuff. The last thing we built that entered into the 100 biggest European companies was Zara, the Spanish fashion company. I'm just back from Silicon Valley, actually, and it's funny. There's so much money sloshing about, and the money's all spent on sort of high-end European clothing, and that's the kind of thing that Europe's contributing right now to the world. So the reason why we're doing all this stuff is we want to create new things. This is not to say we're only interested in elitist kind of unicorns and stuff like that, but we want to have some ambition to try and grow the pie and do more. In context, it looks like this. If you look at the global map, we're just not building big companies anymore. Building big companies is a hard thing to do. It's a subtle thing. I'm not sure we all want to live in a world where there's like 3 billionaires or 2 trillionaires or whatever, and they run politics to whatever else. I think we're looking to try and do this in an equitable way, in a way that's diverse, in a way that allows everyone to take part in it and everyone to prosper and grow, and just have a route to say, if I want to build something, here's a bunch of infrastructure I can access and learn and have a go. If you look at this slide here, this graphic rather here, it's one of my favorite ones because it's one of the few that's really easy to remember. So in the 1960s, the average lifespan of a S&P 500 company was about 60 years. It's 2022, it's about 17 years. So there is no more safest houses type thing. Even the big incumbents are being disrupted, are going down, are living shorter and shorter lives. So we need to normalize this creating new stuff as a way forward. And I'm really hopeful that because Scotland's such a small country, that we can do this together without sort of territorial kind of games that we play. I'll finish at that. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask them.
Yes, and I will emerge from the shadows. Stephen, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, do we have some questions for Stephen? I'm sure we do. Yes, sir, you. Yeah, go first.
Stephen.
Hi.
Thanks, that was great. A question, what do you think is Scotland's competitive advantage with regards building these startups? What is unique to our ecosystem that isn't?
I think I don't know if we have one, to be honest with you. It's a brutal answer, but I just don't know if we have one. I think the thing it could be, so I spend a lot of time in France and Germany, and the big advantage the UK has over those places is that we can access playbooks faster because we speak English. So you can listen to podcasts from, Andreessen Horowitz or Y Combinator or whatever faster and more easily. It's more in your grasp linguistically. The problem has been, Germany and France or Spain, those kind of countries have built things like a Facebook for Germany or a LinkedIn for France. So those ecosystems have tried to localize something faster than Silicon Valley could translate it. And a lot of people have made an awful lot of money with that. Because they've made money with that, they've become focused on a kind of Me Too. Well, Me Too means a lot of different things now, but a fast copy kind of paradigm. And Britain, sadly, there's a LinkedIn for Scotland and all that kind of stuff too. We've done that, but we've not spent as much time as those countries doing it. So I think one of the advantages is that we just speak English and we're closer to the pump of big ideas and big playbook generators. I think we also have the opportunity to be really, really well educated at not a massively high cost. But we need to put all these different things together, and we haven't done that yet. But the building blocks are there, so I'm super optimistic, but I don't think we have a USP yet, really. Any other questions?
Another question for Stephen?
Hi, Stephen. Thank you very much. I very much like the linguistic analysis of ecosystem.
Well, thank
I
you.
think that's useful. My question was around the regional hubs. Are there any plans in place for how they could, the inclusion for hard-to-access remote rural areas?
Yes. Yes, there are plans, yes. So we've been running mentorship programs already with Highlands and Islands. We've done a bunch of stuff in, Stornoway, places like that. Yeah, there is. The obvious answer is always to go, we'll do all that online, but it's not enough. You have to have some kind of presence there as well. It's funny, the more remote something is, the more presence is important. We're working on that, yeah. We've got the big idea behind TechScaler and the Codebase vision for it is to not build a big, shiny new building and then hope that, build it and they will come type stuff, but instead say, what's the existing infrastructure you have? We can populate it with a bunch of cool people, a bunch of cool content, and a bunch of connections and networks. That's what we're trying to do. But yeah, absolutely. Loads of good stuff that comes from there, especially in the energy space.
Any other questions for Steve? Yes. I'm in the corner till I come to get my step count in today, I'll tell you.
Sorry.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Going back to your equalizer analogy,
Yeah.
what's the highest hurdle or the biggest hurdle we need to overcome as soon as possible to kind of crank up the dial for startups to grow in numbers and size?
So that's a really, really good question. Really good question. Really hard question to answer. This is an opinion, right? My opinion would be education and playbook literacy. So the more you understand that this stuff is not... People read there's a book called 0 to 1 from Peter Thiel. So the more you're building a kind of zero-style company, the more you have to sort of rely on people who've done crazy stuff before you. And what did they learn? I look at it this way. I look at it like VCs are kind of theoretical physicists. Sorry, this is the most highbrow analogy ever. I apologize for it. I just can't think of anything better. And applied physicists are startups. So one group of people have a theory or a thesis on how the world's going, and they try to populate that with bets on smart people who are going to try and do something, or tenacious people who are going to try and do something. And they'll come back almost certainly with failure, going, that's impossible, no one's interested, don't want it. But every now and again, a successful thing, and it's 10% of the time or something, it's low rates. But it's taking that learning and that connection and that reality and clothing it in words and being able to communicate with each other in an honest way that shows that you've actually been through it and you know what you're talking about. I think that's the biggest thing we need. At TechScaler, we're trying to do that. We don't think we own this stack or anything. We're just trying to be a platform for all the best people to come in and contribute to that. So if you want to help out with that, just please be in touch.